begin our show today with the breaking news that the President of the United States has decided that it would be worthwhile to pull out of Syria entirely. He tweeted this out this morning to the President of the United States. This would be 13. He said, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria, my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency." Okay, now, have we defeated ISIS in Syria? Well, we certainly stopped the formation of a caliphate. But have we defeated them to the extent that we can actually pull out safely without any sort of repercussions? The answer to that is pretty obviously no. ISIS killed 700 prisoners in Syria just over the past short period of time. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights on Wednesday, Islamic State militants had executed nearly 700 prisoners in nearly 2 months in eastern Syria. The UK-based monitoring group said the prisoners were among 1,350 civilians and fighters ISIS had been holding in territory near the Iraqi border. The jihadists control a shrinking strip of land east of the Syrian Euphrates River around the town of Hajin, which U.S.-backed forces entered this month. The Syrian Democratic Forces, led by the Kurdish YPG militia, have battled ISIS there for several months with the help of U.S. air power and special forces. SDF Commander-in-Chief Mazloum Kobani said last week at least 5,000 ISIS fighters remain holed up in the enclave, including many foreigners who appear ready to fight to the death. ISIS's self-proclaimed caliphate has crumbled after different offensives across Iraq and Syria, although its fighters still operate in the desert border region and mount attacks. Now, here is the reality. So President Trump says that we've destroyed ISIS. We're done. Out. Goodbye. Catch you later. Adios. None of that is really true. Okay, it isn't. We have definitely degraded ISIS's capacity to control strips of territory, but we have not degraded their capacity to the ultimate extent to destroy lives, to create refugee problems, to reconstitute a caliphate. Barack Obama made this exact wrong move in Iraq back in 2010. You remember, you were there, when President Obama decided to rashly, in the middle of his first term, just like this, rashly withdraw forces from Iraq. All that happened was that ISIS ended up invading Iraq and filling the gap. According to the Wall Street Journal today, the U.S. military is preparing to withdraw its forces from Syria. People familiar with the matter said on Wednesday, a move that marks an abrupt reversal of the American military strategy in the Middle East. U.S. officials began informing partners in northeastern Syria of their plans to begin an immediate pullout of American forces from the region where they've been trying to wrap up the campaign against ISIS. The Pentagon has an order to move troops out of Syria as quickly as possible, said one U.S. official. U.S. military officials have refused to say what a withdrawal timeline could look like, but President Trump wrote on Twitter that he was going to get out of Syria basically now, as we referred to earlier. This, by the way, violates President Trump's central principles of foreign policy, which is do not actually telegraph to your opponent what you're about to do. Remember, a lot of his foreign policy is based on what he calls strategic unpredictability, the idea that you don't know what he's going to do on any given day, and this means that you don't want to piss him off because you may get a missile up your rear, right? But when you start telegraphing that we're pulling out as soon as possible, that's exactly, note for note, what Barack Obama did in Iraq in 2010, 2011. The move follows a call last week between Trump and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has threatened to launch an assault on America's Kurdish partners in Syria. Erdogan steadfastly opposes the American partnership with Kurdish forces in Syria that he views as a terrorist force intent on destabilizing Turkey. But the U.S. has relied on the Kurds, as we mentioned, as the most effective fighting force in Syria against ISIS. Well, this follows hard on the news that apparently the Trump administration was seeking the possible extradition of a cleric named Gulen, who's an opponent of Erdogan's in Turkey, back to Turkey for possible imprisonment and trial. Okay, if, in fact, the Trump administration is contemplating a warmer relationship with Islamist Turkey, which has repeatedly quashed dissidents, which has arrested something like 100,000 people in the last couple of years, this is all bad news. I mean, these are, you don't want Turkey increasing its power. You do not want ISIS increasing its power at the expense of the United States moving its troops out. You don't want the Kurds to be decimated by the Turks and by ISIS. All of this is a mistake. The U.S. has long sought to reconcile two seemingly incompatible goals the president has sought in Syria. On the one hand, says the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Trump has pushed to withdraw all U.S. forces from Syria, where more than 2,000 service members are working alongside Syrian militants to defeat ISIS. On the other, he has embraced a strategy that calls for American forces to remain in Syria as a deterrent to Iran's expansive military ambitions. Officially, the U.S. military has no authority to battle Iran in Syria. Their mission has been to defeat ISIS and ensure the militant group that once controlled large swaths of Syria and Iraq is unable to regroup. That task is largely complete because ISIS has been cornered. Earlier this year, Pentagon said that ISIS controlled less than 2% of the territory it once held in the Middle East. And then he said this spring that he wanted to get, President Trump said in the spring that he wanted to get everybody out. But the pullout also comes amid abiding worries about the continued influence of Iran in Syria. And again, Turkey is looking to fill that gap. And it is unclear whether Turkey's actually going to do the job of checking ISIS or whether they are just there to kill the Kurds. So all of this is bad news. Now, this goes to a central question in American foreign policy, and that is, what is American foreign policy for? What exactly do we do when it comes to American foreign policy? Now, the typical answer in the olden days, and by the olden days I mean really in the World War II era, was you stay at home until somebody hits you, then you go in and you wreck them, and then you institute a democracy, right? This is what we did in Germany, this is what we did in Japan. And it worked to a certain extent. I mean, we had to keep troops there forever. I mean, we still have troops and air bases in Germany and Japan. We did the same thing in South Korea, right? We're going to put American troops there, and we're going to maintain troop presence until there's a safe and secure South Korea. Well, the problem is that there are certain parts of the world where this strategy appears not to have particularly taken root. Now, it's also true that the time period that we have given this strategy to work has not been all that long. It's not going to work in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is far too tribal. There's no history of democracy. It's a complete Islamist state. 99% of Afghanis by poll data support honor killings, for example. It's going to be very, very difficult to institute a Western-style democracy in Afghanistan. The same has not been quite as true in Iraq, where there have been the first stirrings of Western-style democracy for a while there. And if we were to leave troops in the country to basically pacify sectarian violence for a few decades, then probably everything would be okay. But we have lost our taste for that.